Jeff, you already kind of alluded to yours. You love the Alex Nedeljkovic signing. Is that what you would consider their best move so far this offseason?
I think that's a great move. I guess the other one that I would have to mention again, I didn't mention it yet, is the hiring of David Quinn. I guess that's not really that's not a Kyle Dubas move, right? Somebody correct me here. Is it?
I'm sure he was involved. I'm sure he has a hand in it. I don't know who, makes the official. Sure. It's either him or Sullivan, but between the two, we've seen that those two are pretty much in cahoots with every move that is made here.
Yeah, and that something needed to happen there. I definitely opined, thought about, pondered the idea of whether Sully's time in Pittsburgh in any way, shape, or form should be considered or reconsidered. And as I read about it, consulted guys like yourselves, other fans, I think I came around to the idea that it's really not a situation where it's like the coach's fault, especially not probably a future Hall of Fame coach's fault in the way of Mike Sullivan, that the team is foundering in the way that they are when you have this legendary core who are aging, and it's just kind of, you're not really able to play the same hockey that you were playing in those cup years. We're well past that now and into this other era. If they'd made a change at the top, so be it. They didn't. And to see Todd Reirden go and to see David Quinn come in, someone who, for lack of a better way of putting it, is kind of like a pseudo Sullivan looking, sounding, pedigreed hockey player and coaching staff type of guy. I mean, they really do almost look like thespian versions of one another, future and past. I don't know how much older Sully is, but maybe it's like in that president role, you age faster when you go on those cup runs. Sully looks great. He's a handsome fella, but he looks a little older to me than David Quinn. Sorry, coach, but
I believe Quinn is 3 years older or something like that, because there was a story.
Quinn's older.
Yeah, there was a story that I think I'm getting it right. Whenever they first coached against each other a couple years back, whenever he was with the Rangers, NBC Sports at the time did a little documentary on them, a small clip, and I think it was Quinn said, because he was a couple years older, he gave his ID to Sullivan to go around the bars at BU. So for like 2 years, he essentially was David Quinn.
Yeah, as of right now, it's 57-56. David Quinn is in the lead. So
like a year.
Wow.
Okay.
They both look great. I just was going to say in comparison to one, but that said, former teammates, and I think that's a really exciting thing. In addition to Nedeljkovic being re-signed, is the addition of David Quinn, and just what if there's a real spark there and a chemistry there between him and Letang and Carlson, and them dialoguing, and what happens if the Pens power play catches fire a little bit. We would see a very different result down the stretch with this team.
And I'm glad you brought that one up, because that's a hiring and a move that I had completely not forgotten about, but kind of overlooked for this section here, because you're right. The kind of new voice, what a new voice behind the bench can bring, especially a guy like Quinn, who can maybe find something new in Chris Letang for the last couple of years, maybe find something new in Marcus Pettersson as he's probably going into a contract season, but most importantly, be that whisperer for Erik Karlsson to wake him back up for his next season after, not meeting expectations in his first year in Pittsburgh. Now he'll have a familiar voice that he had in San Jose, where he got 101 points as a defenseman, allowing him to sort of settle in a little bit more comfortably. It's tough playing with a superstar like that, who kind of doesn't play by his own rules necessarily, but has his own mindset. David Quinn may be honing that in a little, or at least letting other guys know how to work it. It should be a very big net positive for the team. And not what I had written down for my best, but definitely that's a good second the more I think about it and talk about it.
Well, let's hear what is your best, Horwat. Let's go over to your best move of the offseason for Kyle Dubas and the Penguins.
Quite simply, just moving out Riley Smith. We don't have to go too far into detail on it. Just the chemistry seemed to work for the first couple of games, and then it all fell flat and never really woke back up. So moving out on a name like that, you didn't need much in return. You were just trying to dump it off and open up the space, open up the cap space, open up that roster spot for pretty much anyone else. Going from there. It's a topic we've discussed a gazillion times since the season. nothing new was really said other than moving on from him. His, at least as of right now, probably the best move the Penguins have done this offseason.
Yeah, not only getting something back, getting more back than you paid a year prior after a down season. That was on my list. That was certainly on my list there, because you traded a 3rd round pick and everybody said, oh, that's a bargain price, but especially for what you're getting. And then I feel like didn't get close to what they were asking for last year when they acquired Riley Smith. And again, you mentioned it. It's not that he's a bad player. It was just a bad fit in Pittsburgh. But to get back a 2nd and a 5th, and I understand they're retaining 25% of his salary for 1 season. But again, we talked about this on the outset. This is a team that is, don't say the big word out loud, but say the big word out loud, rebuilding. 25% or bagel, say 25% for 1 season is nothing, especially to get a 2nd and a 5th rounder in return for a player that, let's just face it, didn't work with the Pittsburgh Penguins.
And I'd like to add regarding Riley Smith, and again, this is to say nothing per se about somebody I've never met in person, but
yeah,
when I'm reading from the outside perspective as a non, in the locker room person, that Riley Smith has been vocal around the organization from day one about not wanting to be in Pittsburgh. I will self-promote Fly Penguins Fly for 1 second, which is another podcast that's out there somewhere. We talked to Paul Steigerwald for one of the episodes, and he discussed the culture that has disseminated down from Badger Bob and Craig Patrick in the early 90s. And it was such that if you brought bad vibes into the clubhouse, into the locker room, into meetings, into camp, into practice, you did not last long. And according to Staggy, that has lasted through to today in some generational sense. Well, it's a great day for hockey. That's positive. I don't want to be in Pittsburgh. Bye-bye. And the fact that he was here as long as he was frankly kind of, as soon as that started to leak out, that one of our, top talent pieces in the forwards doesn't want to be here, and Sid Crosby is our captain, and Geno Malkin with his particular brand of humor, and Carlson comes in with this great attitude, and Letang, after the incredibly difficult year that he had last year, rose character-wise to the challenge of sharing those top defensive positions. Marcus Pettersson, best attitude. I mean, again, from what I saw, from what I gleaned, receiving the content that Nick Horwat, that you and your other associates in the locker room there were bringing to us on TV and on the radio. As a Penguins fan, that's my favorite part about rooting for this team, is that there's so much positivity. There's a good vibe almost always, right, with all these cats. And when we get to worst moves, once again, I just can't wait for that one.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Riley Smith necessarily brought the vibes down openly. I think maybe there was some quiet, because nothing's going to be open and obvious. This isn't the NFL where guys are straight up saying nonsense things to get a rise.
Although for NHL terms, that was as close as I've ever heard it come in Penguins land, to someone kind of being like almost anti-Penguin while wearing the crest. I mean, that was weird.
And like I said, he's not going to straight up come out and say it, but I can understand where, from some of the vibes that were there, where people would have that conclusion. And I'm impressed that sort of mindset from the 90s has carried over. That's something you really want to hear, that you only want guys that want to play for your team. That should always be the way it is. I mean, sometimes it just doesn't happen. And it makes me think more of some of the faces that have shown up for a year, maybe 2, whether it be through a draft or through a trade or a signing, and then have been gone pretty quickly. I mean, a couple of names came to mind right away, and maybe there was something to be said about that for those certain guys.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say about Riley Smith at the tail end of this is, the thing that you mentioned there, Horwat, is you would have never been able to know inside the locker room just by being there if you didn't hear it from elsewhere. He's a professional, as are most of these players that are brought into the Penguins organization. So he has to be commended for that. But again, the attitude towards the trade, the actual performance on the ice, that stuff you can dock him for. I'll say that for certain. But again, the professionalism was there. I don't think there was ever an iota of belief that he was actually dogging it on the ice because he was unhappy. I feel like he put his full foot forward, but it wasn't a fit in Pittsburgh. Let's close out the best moves here. I'll just throw one extra one on the pile here because there have been a lot of good ones discussed already. I'm going to say the Kevin Hayes trade is up there because, again, what are you trying to do? You're trying to not mortgage the future. In fact, you're trying to make a brighter future while making the team currently a little bit better. Kevin Hayes trade, very low risk. In fact, almost no risk for medium reward. He could be a 40 to 50 point producer, if possible, at his best. He's a guy that brings in that veteran presence. He's a guy that is historically, outside of, whatever happened at the tail end in Philly, has historically been seen as a very good locker room presence. You bring a guy like that in, gain a second rounder in the process. I think it's a nice little piece of business from Kyle Dubas. That's why I'll put that in the best move category. I agree with Jeff. The David Quinn one is probably a little bit higher up there. I agree with the Riley Smith one being pretty high up there, but I think Kevin Hayes trade needs to go up there as well.
I don't disagree with that at all either. It's just a matter of seeing how it goes, seeing how it turns out. But I like that one too.
So sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish off.
On Kevin Hayes, we love having anybody in the Penguins locker room who was a part of spreading the gospel about the bad vibes in Philadelphia, as he was so, well storied to have been a part of. So allegedly. Well done there, Kevin.
Allegedly. We'll say
allegedly indeed. I certainly don't have proof of that. So.